medical care or prescription drugs compared to whites and Asians. Ritu Chatterjee, NPR News.
The UK is facing more extreme heat this week after enduring a month of record-breaking temperatures. Forecasters have issued a heat alert, with temperatures climbing above 30 Celsius or 86 degrees. The advisory will remain in place through Saturday, where folks don't have access to air conditioning. The heat in Britain and other parts of Europe have also fueled wildfires. In the U.S., much of the above normal temperatures are linked to climate change. Stocks finished mostly flat on Wall Street today. The Dow gained about 29 points. You're listening to NPR News.
Erie Art Company is dedicated to the advancement of innovative art and arts education programming. Together with community leaders and Erie area artists, the Erie Art Company creates exhibits and art spaces that merge arts and technology initiatives while providing a learning and collaborative atmosphere. The vision especially includes providing unique spaces and support for new creators. Information is available at erieartcompany.org. A donation from a member of WQLN made this message possible. The nonprofit partnership
okay, guys, sorry about that. Just going the wrong direction. I tend to go west of 20 and I found myself going east of 20.
We are thrilled to share this news with you. For more than 50 years, the WQLN team has worked tirelessly every day to bring learning to life with exceptional programming and opportunities for our viewers and our listeners to make connections in our community. To all of our members, thank you for supporting WQLN, the nonprofit partnership's nonprofit of the year.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Amazon Business, from small business to big enterprise and everything in between. Amazon Business works to help simplify the supplies buying process. Learn more at amazonbusiness.com. And from Indeed, a hiring platform designed to streamline the hiring process. Indeed works to help businesses attract, interview, and hire candidates in one place. More at indeed.com/NPR. And from the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California.
And I'm Juana Summers in Washington. Things are mostly calm after 3 days of intense fighting between Israel and militants in the Gaza Strip. The ceasefire took effect last night. Israel says that the militant group Islamic Jihad fired some 1,100 rockets total. There were no deaths in Israel thanks to missile defense systems and shelters there. But in Gaza, health officials say at least 44 people, including several children, died. They blamed Israeli airstrikes, but Israel says some of the deaths were caused by militant rockets that fell short. NPR's Fatma Tanis joins us from Jerusalem now to look at how this played out in the aftermath. Hi, Fatma.
Hi, Juana.
So how did this ceasefire come about?
You know, pretty much how other ceasefires have come about recently. It's almost like a playbook at this point. Egypt mediated between the militants and Israel as it borders both Gaza and Israel and can speak to both sides. The talks went through and they reached an agreement on Sunday. There were some rockets fired up right up to when the truce went into place, and even a few were fired after it did. But the terms of the truce weren't made public, and so now there is some concern that the fighting could start again. Islamic Jihad wants 2 prisoners who were recently arrested back, but Israel says it didn't agree to that and warned it would respond harshly to any new rocket fire from Gaza.
Let's look now at what the two sides are saying about this. How is this being viewed by each?
So keep in mind that in Gaza, they haven't been able to rebuild most of the damage from last year's war between Hamas and Israel, which went on for 11 days and led to some 260 people being killed. And the trauma from that is ongoing, especially with children. But the scene in Gaza today is people surveying what's happened and trying to focus on fixing the damage. You mentioned the 1,100 rockets from Gaza. Israel says 200 of those actually fell short into Gaza and caused some of the civilian casualties there. Meanwhile, Islamic Jihad is focused on trying to get their prisoners out. They need some sort of a win here. I spoke with someone in Gaza who said that some people there are questioning whether Islamic Jihad should have gotten into this fight with Israel that led to a lot of damage. Notably, though, Hamas stayed out of it. And that's one thing that's different about this conflict and really a key to why it didn't spiral. Now, in Israel, this is being painted as a military success. Israeli officials are stressing that they achieved a lot here. You know, they say that they killed 2 top commanders of Islamic Jihad militants and many others. They took out a tunnel, they say, and that they set the group back severely.
Now, there are politics on both sides of this conflict, both Palestinian and Israeli, and those were highlighted this weekend. What can you tell us about that?
So in Gaza, we're talking about 2 groups. There's Hamas, which controls Gaza, and then the much smaller Islamic Jihad. And they compete with each other for followers. Now, recently, Hamas has been trying to keep things calm. They seem to want to continue rebuilding Gaza from last year's war by getting Israel to ease restrictions on imports to Gaza and other economic relief. So they've stayed completely out of this. Meanwhile, in Israel, caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid is in charge, and he's faced some criticism that he's not as experienced on security issues, and an election is coming up in November. And his opposition is going to be former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's known for being a hawk. And so some in Israel say that this has helped Lapid establish himself. There were pictures of him briefing Netanyahu on the operation, and Netanyahu showed his support to how Israel handled it.
That is NPR's Fatma Tanis in Jerusalem. Thank you.
Thank you.
President Biden toured flood damage in eastern Kentucky earlier today. It has been more than a week since flash floods cascaded through many mountain communities in the region, killing at least 37 people. More are still missing. Cleanup will take months, and many worry the region will never be the same. The president said Kentucky can count on federal support.
I promise you, we're not leaving. Federal government, all its resources, we're not leaving. As long as it takes, we're going to be here.
Rylan Barton is the managing editor for Kentucky Public Radio and joins us now from eastern Kentucky. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, so can you tell us more about what President Biden saw today? Where did he go exactly?
Yeah, so the president flew into Breathitt County, which is one of the areas that was hardest hit by the flooding. He said from the air he saw creeks and rivers that were covered with flood debris, which is really everywhere out here. There are pieces of homes, clothing, furniture, toys, and trash, all of it left in trees and bushes along the riverbanks. He stopped at an elementary school in the town of Lost Creek. It's become a hub for supplies and a place for people to get help after the flood. He praised the recovery effort, including FEMA, which has had about 700 people on the ground right now. And he talked to families, one of whose prehab home was all twisted up, another that had been knocked off its foundation. The president's big message was that the federal government is committed to helping people recover from the flood. At this point, there aren't really any firm estimates about how much that recovery will cost, except that it's going to be massive. He also said disasters like this show the importance of putting politics aside. Eastern Kentucky is a region that used to be heavily Democratic, but has become really Republican in recent years, especially during the Trump era.
God, Rylan, I'm just trying to visualize some of those details you mentioned, like a twisted up home, one literally washed off its foundation. Can you just talk a little more about what it looks like on the ground right now? You were visiting with people over the weekend, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell at this point that the flooding was over a week ago because it's still such a big mess. There is mud everywhere. I'm in Jackson right now, which is also in Breathitt County. It's a city that's situated along a river in the mountains. I talked to Ramona Combs, whose house is still wet, like so many other homes. And her floor is like a roller coaster because it's so buckled. Whether she moves back into her house depends on how much she gets from FEMA.
We're going to clean out what we want, the rest we're going to trash, and then you just wait for FEMA to see what they're going to do.
Like many people in the area, Combs didn't have flood insurance. I've talked to people who do, and they say their outlook isn't much better. It's going to be a long time until people get assistance, and even then, it may not be enough. When the tornadoes ripped through western Kentucky late last year, a very small percentage of people who applied for federal housing aid ended up getting it. 6 months after that disaster, there was only a 16% approval rate.
Wow, only 16%. Well, given that flooding is not new to the region, I mean, are people there just wanting to not put up with it anymore and want to move somewhere else? What are they saying?
I mean, yeah, there definitely are, and that's one of the saddest parts of what's going on right now. Breathitt County got hit by a big flood last year as well. I talked to a family that had just rebuilt their house, and this time got hit even harder. Randall Combs says he's either going to move to higher ground or just leave.
See, I don't plan on moving back in, to be honest with you. I'm going to find me another place to live. If we get enough money from the insurance company to do that.
Eastern Kentucky has been suffering from the decline of the coal industry. A lot of people have moved off because there are fewer jobs, and a flood like this might just accelerate this whole process of depopulating a really beautiful and culturally vibrant part of the country.
That is Rylan Barton with Kentucky Public Radio in Eastern Kentucky. Thank you so much, Rylan.
Thank you.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News. For many Black people in Kentucky and Tennessee, the 8th of August is a special day in the same spirit as Juneteenth. And as Derek Operly of member station WKMS reports, the regional emancipation celebration was started by the freed slave of a U.S. president.
Black communities in Kentucky and Tennessee have been turning out on the 8th of August for over 150 years, marking their freedom from slavery with homecomings, historical remembrances, and usually a good party. West Kentucky native Rhonda Smith grew up celebrating on August 8th, and though Juneteenth is now nationally recognized, she wasn't familiar with the Texas tradition turned federal holiday until pretty recently.
I'm 64. I was 63 when I first celebrated Juneteenth, and I wouldn't have done it then if my daughter wasn't cooking fish. I wouldn't have got up and went.
Historians say August 8th, 1863 was the day future U.S. President Andrew Johnson freed his own slaves in Tennessee. Johnson, then military governor of the state, did this because the Emancipation Proclamation earlier that year didn't include Tennessee, which was then under Union control. And Kentucky wasn't included because it was a neutral border state in the Civil War. One of those slaves, Samuel Johnson, organized the first 8th of August event in Greenville 8 years later. Here's William Isom, the director of Black in Appalachia, a nonprofit that documents African American contributions to the Mountain South.
There was a parade with Andrew Johnson in attendance and some other elected officials and Samuel Johnson, and several newspaper accounts in East Tennessee, each credited with being the one that spread the 8th of August as Emancipation Day.
Historians like Isom and Alistine Turley, the director of the Freedom Stories Project, which focuses on African American and Appalachian history, think the tradition likely spread as Black Appalachians moved out across the region seeking a better life and fleeing racial persecution during the Reconstruction era.
I think if you look at the exodus or the expulsion of African Americans from Appalachia, you'll be able to draw pretty much a straight line.
These celebrations foster a sense of community among Black residents in places like Paducah and Russellville in Kentucky and Knoxville in Tennessee. Marvin Nunn is one of the lead organizers for Paducah's 8th of August festivities, which this year include a parade, a dance, and a block party, among other things. Nunn's family moved from Paducah to Detroit when he was a kid, but he always used to come home for the 8th.
Matter of fact, the only time I missed an 8th of August celebration was when I was in the military and overseas. And I was depressed because I couldn't make it to Paducah for the 8th of August. I've always done it.
Even now, in towns across Kentucky and Tennessee, many Black families, schools, and churches are hosting reunions and homecomings. Juneteenth and the 8th of August aren't the only widespread events commemorating Black freedom in America. Many Black Americans also mark January 1st, the day President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation went into effect in 1863. No matter what the date, historian William Isom says these celebrations have survived through some of Black America's most trying times.
People have been celebrating through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, seasons of racial atrocities, and even today in the state of rampant police violence and murder against Black folks in America.
Isom says these regional observances help people to recognize progress, even if there's still a long way to go. For NPR News, I'm Derek Operly in Paducah, Kentucky.
Relax for an hour and go to bed. Work on my videos tomorrow.
This
This is All Things Considered from NPR News.
Next time on The People's Pharmacy, we'll bring you up to date on the health stories behind the headlines.
Whether it's a therapeutic breakthrough or a drug disaster, get an in-depth briefing from the experts.
Our lines are open for your questions about prescription drugs, nutritional supplements, herbs, and home remedies.
Tune in for the health news that matters to you on the next People's Pharmacy.
Saturday morning at 7 on WQLN Radio.
Hey, it's Francis Lamb. Have you ever thought that maybe the wildest career in food is to be a caterer? I mean, think about it. You're cooking dinner for hundreds, maybe thousands of people at a time, and you might be doing it on a beach with no kitchen or running water. This week, it's life on the catering line on the Splendid Table from 8 p.m. Sunday morning at 11 on WQLN NPR.
We're having a listen to some quirky, different, maybe slightly obscure musical selections on our radio this week. Are you at all curious? Then join me for the Thistle and Shamrock.
Sunday afternoon at 1 on WQLN NPR.
I will never be cancer-free, but it's under control because of the chemo. If I didn't have a future ahead where I could get back on my boats, I could get back at sea, I'm not sure how I would handle it. I'm happiest on a boat, on the water.
I'm Michael Norbara. That's Today on the Daily from the New York Times. This afternoon at 6:30 on WQLN NPR.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Elsa Chang. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is on a trip to Africa. He's telling countries that the U.S. doesn't want them to feel squeezed by geopolitics. The U.S. is in a struggle for influence on the continent with China and to some extent Russia. But Blinken says he looks to African countries as equal partners. NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports.
In a lecture hall at the University of Pretoria, Blinken laid out his approach to the continent. He said he doesn't want countries to feel caught in the middle of America's competition with Russia or China.
Time and again, they have been told to pick a side in great power contests that feel far removed from daily struggles of their people. The United States will not dictate Africa's choices. Neither should anyone else.
But Blinken took a swipe at Russia for undermining the UN Charter with its invasion of Ukraine, wreaking havoc on global food markets and sending unsavory mercenaries to conflicts in Africa.
That includes the Kremlin-backed Wagner Group, which exploits instability to pillage resources and commit abuses with impunity, as we've seen in Mali and the Central African Republic.
Russia's foreign minister visited several African countries recently in a sign that he's less isolated than the U.S. would like. South Africa has remained neutral in UN debates over Russia's war in Ukraine. Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor says that doesn't mean her country supports the war. She says she wants diplomacy. But she also doesn't think this issue should take attention away from other matters on the UN agenda.
Just as much as the people of Ukraine deserve their territory and freedom, the people of Palestine deserve their territory and freedom.
The South African foreign minister pressed Blinken on trade issues and tariffs and said Africa can't be party to a conflict between the U.S. and China. She says she hopes they can find some way to ease tensions.
These are two great powers, the two biggest economies in the world. They've got to find a way of working together to allow us to grow.
Secretary Blinken says the U.S. doesn't want a conflict with China, and he accused Beijing of overreacting to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last week. China has stepped up military exercises and cut off talks with the U.S., including on climate change. The Secretary of State says that could hurt developing nations, including here in Africa. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News.
I just need a large Coke and a bottle of water. That's it. Okay.
A mixture of climate change and mismanagement means residents there often go for days without tap water. That and the frequent power outages that are plaguing the entire country
sicknesses and troubles. Remember, when I wash dishes, I have to use as little water as possible. It tells me, taking a bath, I have to do the same.
Yep.
Drink water
There you go.
to make sure I breathe enough. So this water issue affects us badly. It affects us badly. These came birthplace Ashtabula is known for its rush.
Do you get a lot of people coming just like wanting a pop or a water or all the time? Yeah. Yeah. Say you're thirsty, you're thirsty. You know, you gotta have water or whatever. You know. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Now 4 years, we are actually in the 7th year receiving below average. Henceforth, we are actually in a crisis where the dams are actually depleting as we speak.
But the shortage is man-made as well. Aging infrastructure has led to 28% of the water leakages. There were many warning signs, but authorities did little to hit them. And in much the same way, the crisis in the power supply was ignored. Generators, the soundtrack of this city and many others across South Africa right now. Unreliable electricity supply has become South Africa's nightmare since the mid-2000s and is getting increasingly worse. And this is entirely a man-made crisis with failing infrastructure at the center of the problem. Despite promises to invest and root out corruption, South Africa's ruling African National Congress has done very little so far.
There are a number of issues that are wrong, but I think the most patent one now that we cannot run away from is the absence of leadership.
Political analyst Lukhona Muguni says the ANC is out of its depth.
I think you've got a leadership crisis that is...
Love is like a circle, there's no easy way to end. It's too much, I can't take anymore.
Sorry.
Hello, beloved. This is Mother Miriam, and I have a wonderful announcement for you. LifeSite News is celebrating its 25th anniversary with a gala in Naples, Florida on August 17th. Join me, LifeSite Editor-in-Chief John Henry Weston, Father James Altman, and other VIP guests, including keynote speaker Jim Caviezel, as we celebrate LifeSite's accomplishments defending life and promoting faith, family, and freedom for a quarter of a century. Your admission includes a cocktail and hors d'oeuvres hour, a lovely dinner, and an evening of elegance, celebration, inspiration, and gratitude. Tickets are limited, so be sure to visit gala25.lifesitenews.com.
Regular babies' lives and sharing the heart of Jesus. School boards in a lot of communities that still...
Patricia Stubber, CEO, Multicultural Health Evaluation Delivery System.
MEDS generally hires from the populations we serve to allow for linguistic and cultural alignment. We mostly have native speakers who provide interpretation during appointments. Sometimes there are languages that we don't have immediately available, so we contract outside our organization for those.
Veterans like LaToya get the benefits they've earned. They help more than 1 million veterans every year in life-changing ways.
With DAV on my side, I was able to pursue my dreams. If my story can touch a heart, it can change a life. My victory is overcoming my wounds so I can help other veterans.
LaToya Lucas, may your victories inspire many more. Support more victories for veterans. Go to DAV.org.
This is the Rich Eisen Show.
Let me see you put your hands up now. Now.
With guest host, Steve Weissman.
I've been listening to you guys since day one. You guys are phenomenal.
Live from the Rich Eisen Show studio in Los Angeles. Earlier on the show, NFL Network host MJ Acosta Ruiz. Still to come, Big Ten Network broadcaster Lisa Byington. Tennis Hall of Famer Andy Roddick. Plus, Pro Football Hall of Famer Kurt Warner. And now, sitting in for Rich, it's Steve Weissman.
It is hour 2 of the Rich Eisen Show. Steve Weissman filling in for Rich today. So happy to be here. Reminder, the number to call in, 844-204-RICH. Brockman, Del Tufo, TJ. Del Tufo, we haven't heard enough from you today, by the way.
I was working on a couple things.
All right.
We're good now.
Well,
yeah, we had some
issues. For the next 2 hours, we're going to get some more Del Tufo in. But now, it is a pleasure to welcome my friend, my fellow Northwestern Wildcat, lover of a good omelet, broadcaster of many sports in many places, as Lisa Byington likes to say. Lisa Byington, most notably the voice of the Milwaukee Bucks. Lisa, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Steve, you forgot a lover of Steve Weissman omelets. It's very, very, very specific.
just the omelets I make. You make it. I mean, I feel I've gotten the photos from you. I feel like your omelet game is stepping up these days.
You know, I follow your directions, and if people don't follow Steve on Instagram, let me change that right now, because if you don't know something about Steve, he's a brilliant broadcaster, but maybe even a better side chef. And the things that you post, it just makes my mouth water just looking at it. But you know, I appreciate the intro, but you left one very important resume for both of us out of it.
Well, I was going to get to it, but go. You can go for it.
Okay, because I heard you drop the Alpena, Michigan thing. So what are the odds that 2 Alpena, Michigan WBKB broadcasters would be reuniting on the Rich Eisen Show?
Well, yeah, started at the bottom, now we're here. So it's literally the WBKB, which Lisa knows at one point and probably still stood for We Barely Know Broadcasting. Market 208. What's your best Alpena story, Lisa?
Probably covering the Brown Trout Festival. You know, I'm not big in the fishing world. You mentioned I do a lot of sports, but fishing is not one of them. But I did for one weekend, and it literally, it's called the Brown Trout Festival, and the entire city of Alpena and the area, I feel like it shuts down, you know, just to take part in the Brown Trout Festival. I caught my first salmon, and as I tell this story, the weight of the salmon continues to grow. I think it's out now at like 196 pounds. It's the weight of the salmon that I caught, but just doing some unique things like that you wouldn't normally get to do.
My first story was ice fishing. Like literally first day, Saturday, you know, we're the weekend sports anchor, go out to Grand Lake and go ice fishing. And they had to give me these boots that were made out of whale blubber. I mean, it's literally the coldest place I've ever been, Alpena, Michigan. And somehow here we are now. So, listen, you were a two-sport athlete at Northwestern. Soccer, basketball. First time I ever met you was, I believe, interviewing you when I worked for WNUR Sports, calling the women's basketball games at Northwestern, and you were, you know, a star point guard on the squad, number 11, leading the way. How did you navigate your way to where you are now, Lisa?
Well, I always thought I was going to have to wear that number 11 jersey, and I was going to play sports for the rest of my life. And then I realized quickly that was not going to happen. But I couldn't really make a living professionally doing that. So, you know, junior, senior year at Northwestern is when I really started to pivot and start thinking about what I wanted to do. I love sports so much that I tried to figure, like, okay, look, if you can't play sports, what can you do? And I went the local news route. You know, I went to the McGill School of Journalism, and they prepare you for a lot of interesting things. And I always thought that I was going to be the Sports Center anchor. The Sports Center, as you worked it, it was, you know, the show to watch, right? Well, when you were growing up, that's the first thing I would tune into when I eat my cereal and start my day. And I started out local news and did local news for the first 12 years. Hooked on with the Big Ten Network in the first year of the Big Ten Network in 2007, and never said really no to opportunities. Said yes to play-by-play, to sideline reporting, some of those jobs I had never done before. And then slowly but surely, you know, doors were to open up because I just wasn't scared to say yes to something I hadn't done before.
It's an amazing story because I mean I know you went to Lansing after Alpena and you were there for a long time, and I'm so happy to see everything that you're accomplishing now and getting all the accolades that you are, because you've worked your tail off and you've earned every single thing every step of the way, and now you're the voice of the Milwaukee Bucks, which is so cool. You get extra access to Giannis, right? So other than what we see on court, this guy is a global superstar. I talk to tennis players like Maria Sakkari and Stefano Tsitsipas, top 10 tennis players, who look up to Giannis and say that his story inspires them. What makes him so special outside the stuff we see on court?
I think he's so humble, and he's one of the few celebrities that you see that he is exactly who he is when he sits there and does his dad jokes in the post game. When you see the fire in him on the court, I mean, he's both part kid and part superstar, and he embraces both of those roles, and he will never ever forget. I don't know if you guys have been able to check out Rise, which is his movie that came out this summer. I tell a story about his family. You know, family is so important to him, number one, but number two, never forgetting about where he came from is equally as important. And so because of that, he will always be one of the most humble superstars you will ever meet. And one of those guys that will never, ever not show the joy of playing in an NBA basketball game or whatever game he's going to be playing in. You know, I mean, I think the NBA gets a bad rap sometimes for players mailing it in and not caring. Well, I would encourage you to continue to watch Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Milwaukee Bucks, because you just will not get that kind of attitude from Giannis ever.
How many times did you have to say his last name over and over before, you know, the first game call of the Bucks?
You know, I got interviewed plenty of times on like radio stations and television stations, and so I got plenty of practice with that. You know, it's interesting because you can pronounce it two different ways. You can pronounce it the Nigerian way, which has more D's and D's in it, and then you can pronounce it the way I just did, Antetokounmpo, where there's more T's and P's. That's more of the Greek version. And that's actually the way that if you ask Giannis to say his name, and I just was looking at a social media clip, that's the way that he now pronounces his name. You know, obviously he's been attached now to the Greek Freak, right? Branding of everything, and he's going to play for the Greek national team with his brothers here coming up in the Eurobasket tournament. So, but it is interesting, you know, he's got both that Nigerian descent and now the Greek ties as well. So, Just say it really fast and with authority is what I tell people. And
That's a combo.
And they won't question you.
or just call him the Greek freak. Just call him. I remember when he first came out.
Just call him Giannis.
Yeah, on SportsCenter, I would literally just say Giannis. I'd be like Giannis. I'd say a real big, make it a big entrance. Lisa, we had MJ Acosta-Ruiz on earlier, who is a true trailblazer in our industry, first Afro-Latina to host a show on NFL Network. You're the first female full-time play-by-play voice for a major men's professional sports team with the Bucks. You're also the first woman to do play-by-play in men's NCAA basketball tournament history for CBS and Turner Sports. First woman to call football games on the Big Ten Network. Absolutely incredible and inspiring. I mentioned the Billie Jean King quote, "You got to see it to be it." Now that people have seen you for a little bit, what effect do you think it's had on others being it as well?
I hope I don't have to answer these questions many more times, and I hope other women who are in play-by-play roles or quote-unquote non-traditional roles that we're not used to or accustomed to seeing women in can stop answering these questions. I understand why the questions come, but I've always said, Steve, that my goal is to have a female voice on a quote-unquote men's game become background noise. And you're thinking, well, what does that mean? Well, think of how many times you're just listening to a game in the background and you're not thinking twice about who the announcers are because, more times than not, there are two men calling the game. And so I'm guilty of it as anyone. When you have a game on, and regardless if the female voice is a play-by-play or an analyst, but someone in a non-traditional role, and typically on a men's game, football, baseball, soccer, basketball, I stop sometimes to think and to try to figure out who's that female announcer doing that game. And so the goal is to do the job in the right way and good enough that more women get hired in these roles. And that eventually it becomes, and it's probably going to be a generational change. It's probably not something that subconsciously we're all going to make that shift and that pivot 5 years or a couple years down the line. But someday we just stop thinking about gender ties to an announcer and we just look at them as announcers.
I don't want Lisa Byington to be background noise. I'll just tell you that. I love the way you call games. I love listening to you during March Madness, during football season, during basketball season. I mean, literally, I have 2 full-time jobs. I think you have about 17 of them. You cover literally every sport, and that is not easy to do, to be an expert one day on one thing and the next day on something else. So I give you a ton of props for that. Your first football game on Big Ten Network this year, September 3rd. It's coming up. Maryland hosting Buffalo. How do you see the Big Ten football shaping up this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have Michigan also in week 2 against Hawaii, and I was just recently looking at Michigan and how they kind of stacked up against Ohio State. For the Big Ten this year, it's the first time, right? Like, you're not having any, major head coaching changes. All 14 head coaches return. I think some of the biggest storylines is some of these teams, Michigan, included, have made some major changes with their offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators. So, the first couple weeks, what we know Michigan football could be, or with Ohio State on the defensive side of the ball, that's where they made their DC changes. It will be interesting to see the styles and the schemes of some of these teams and how things have evolved. I think the Big Ten has shown itself in terms of making the college football playoffs as well, and with Ohio State and Michigan, I think being some of the favorites to once again possibly be in there as well. But I think there's just a lot of question marks. I think there'll be a lot of intrigue because of some of those coaching changes that I mentioned about, especially in the first couple weeks. And Ohio State is out of the gates, right, plays Notre Dame. So that's one on September 3rd that I'm looking forward to kind of keeping an eye on.
Lisa, very smart to go Michigan heavy on the Rich Eisen show. A lot of Michigan analysis. Go Blue. I mean, listen, we both spend a lot of time. You're from Michigan, right? You're from Western Michigan?
I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and my first two jobs were, as you mentioned, Alpena, Michigan, and Lansing, Michigan. So I am heavy on the state of Michigan.
That said, Lisa, you are a Northwestern Wildcat, student athlete, the whole deal. Are we going to make a bowl game again this year? How's Coach Fitz going to do?
Well, you know, he's got that weird, like, win 3 games and then win the West Division, win 3 games kind of like pattern going. So since they had lost 3 games last year, maybe the West Division title in a bowl game is in the horizon. But as you know, I mean, when they have fallen off, as with a lot of teams, it's been quarterback issues, right? And it's just kind of been a merry-go-round for them in that position. So I'd like to see him solidify that, and you know, Fitz finds some magic over there. So I'm hoping that Northwestern and the Big Ten can get as many teams in bowl games again this year.
He was Fitzmagic before Fitzmagic. Pat Fitzgerald, what a legend there at Northwestern. What's your take on college athletes and these NIL deals? I mean, you would have been a millionaire before you even entered your professional broadcasting world with all your, you know, accolades as a 2-sport athlete. But what do you make of this?
You know, as you mentioned, I played 2 sports at Northwestern, right? Basketball and soccer. So I kind of feel at the time, basketball is a full scholarship sport, and I ended up walking on the soccer team as well and playing both. And soccer is not a full scholarship sport. So, you know, if you were to ask this question, I was really in the camp about me, student athletes, many years ago. Coming off of my experience of just playing in the 90s, I was thinking about the opportunities and the advantages I got as a student athlete at Northwestern in just a full scholarship sport with basketball. I mean, you were getting per diems and stipends and not spending all that money, so I was saving it, you know, and sometimes using that to buy Christmas gifts, right, for my family. You know, we would get gear. We would play in the Big Ten basketball conference tournament, and the conference would get clearance to issue us gifts. So I remember one time we got a TV as a gift, just participating. You talk about participation awards, right? Yep. Just for participating in the Big Ten conference tournament, we were getting TV. So that was back in the 90s. So if you were to ask me back then, I would say, you know, not just the free education that you get and going to a school like Northwestern. And so I was in a camp back then about, you know what, the student athletes are getting paid, and this is how they are getting paid, and they are getting benefits. But, you know, the sports landscape is changing, and now I've flipped, and I see that, you know, hey, if a Northwestern theater student has the capability of getting benefits or getting paid and outside sources, you know, why can't a Northwestern football player or a Northwestern basketball player do the same thing? You know, social media, which didn't exist, you know, when we were in college, that's changed the world, and now student athletes have become their own best marketers, right? So, you know, my concern is that of many. I think that the haves and the have-not will only separate more, and so my concern is that the rich getting richer. And so obviously I think there has to be some regulations to be put in place. But NIL, I'm not smart enough to let you know what those can be. And I also recognize, too, that sometimes we put in the wrong regulations, and regulations in themselves have been a problem. But it's a sensitive issue. I'm glad my job is not in those negotiation rooms or rule-setting rooms, and that I just get to put on the headset and talk about the athletes and the sports that they play.
Lisa, after joining us today here on the Rich Eisen Show, you are doing something very special. What is that?
Well, I'm meeting a young woman, Reagan Holgate, and she just graduated from Michigan State. And she is the first honoree of the Lisa Beinson Award. And it's still a little bit weird for me to say the name of that award, but it's not something that I chose. It was something, actually, the whole concept of it, I was surprised by the Big Ten Conference and the Big Ten Network. And so I think it was pushed a little bit by Commissioner Kevin Warren, and it came, you know, on the heels of the Milwaukee Bucks making the hire to make me the voice of the Milwaukee Bucks, and Commissioner Warren and the Big Ten Conference and the Big Ten Network wanted to do something to put my name to it to honor the best female broadcaster in the Student U world. And the Student U world is all 14 Big Ten schools. They have programs for all the students at all those schools to be a part of games, to broadcast games, whether it's behind the camera or in front of the camera. And this is year one. And so Reagan Holgate was our winner. She's from Michigan State. She is an awesome broadcaster and even better person. And we're meeting with her today, and part of the award is she gets a free lunch in Chicago. And then she gets a tour throughout the Big Ten Network studios today. We'll take her through. She'll get to taste actually some stuff herself. And then she'll get to sit back and look at the control room and watch actually the big show, which is being taped today. She'll get to sit through that and maybe ask some questions. So she just gets like the best seat in the house to watch a network go to work here today.
That's so cool, Lisa. Congratulations to Reagan. Congratulations to you. Once again, the Lisa Byington Award, honoring the top female student youth broadcaster every year. This is year one. Reagan's going to have an awesome time today. We really appreciate you spending some time with us here on the Rich Eisen Show. All the icon vibes for Lisa Byington. Lisa, hope to see you soon.
All right. See you from one Alpena alum to the next. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. You got it. Go Cats. Lisa Byington, absolute trailblazer here in broadcasting, does so much. I mean, she was doing the Big Three this weekend, basketball, doing football for Big Ten Network. The Lisa Byington Award, how cool is that to have an award named after you because of all the stuff that you've already accomplished. And speaking of folks that have accomplished stuff, we got Andy Roddick coming up next. Tennis Hall of Famer, another legend in his own right. Steve Weissman filling in for Rich today on the Rich Eisen Show. Don't go anywhere.
Southern Recipe Pork Rinds. Southern Recipe Pork Rinds have the bacony crunch you crave in a protein-packed, low-carb snack. They're the pork rind that tastes best for just about any event. Southern Recipe Pork Rinds are also low-sugar, gluten-free, and naturally loaded in collagen, so it's a no-brainer. Get through the daily grind with Southern Recipe Pork Rinds at southernrecipe.com today. Southern Recipe Pork Rinds.
Visit Amazon today for your Southern Recipe Pork Rinds.
In the wee hours of the
Pouches. Are your pretzels, puffs, or point? Restrictions may apply.
This is the Officer Tatum Show on the Salem News Channel, on the Salem Podcast Network, and right here, right now.
Welcome back to the Officer Tatum Show. I want to thank those of you who have donated over the weekend to the campaign on behalf of the Christian nonprofit relief organization Food for the Poor. A lot of folks went to theofficertatum.com and clicked on the Help Ukraine banner, helping us rush urgently needed emergency meals to thousands of displaced children and families in war-torn Ukraine. James Hopkins works with one of the ministry partners called Youth with the mission that helps distribute relief to refugees.
And we're taking food, still humanitarian aid, to some of the cities where most of our refugees came from. We've built a relationship with the pastors there. We're providing them with food and finances to help the Christians be equipped that they can reach the people in their cities.
Your generosity helps support the efforts of people like James, who are on the ground delivering food, water, and emergency supplies. Every dollar donated by my listeners will pay for 4 meals. So that means $50 get you 200 meals, $100 will get you 400 meals, and so on and so forth. I want you to consider this because, I'm sick of Ukraine. I'm going to be honest. I'm sick of us helping them. But I want you to consider the people, not the government, but the people. And as Christians, we're called to help people. And I want you to consider your donation being an effort to help the people that are in need. I want us to remember that when this war started, the men had to stay and the women and children had to evacuate, and many of them are without their fathers, without parents. They're struggling. And so it is up to us to provide and help them in case of need. The government is a different story in my opinion. So please go to theofficertatum.com. Click.
And it's no bloating, gas, and a lot of discomfort. Try Align Probiotics for a month. See how great and healthy gut can feel. $2 off your first month of Align at AlignProbiotics.com.
Rocket 105 take us everywhere this summer. So a Florida scuba tour operator is like, I'm tired of people thinking that sharks always mean the worst possible thing when that's not the case. So he's literally befriended a tiger shark that he's named Emma. How's he pulling this off, and is this really like a good idea? 6:40 as we close it out for the night. It stands at first.
There ain't no go. I had no hard feelings. Oh, we're out of touch. I've been driving in a lane.
Star 104.
And the world feels too big.
Listeners are funny. Starting to pick up Detroit stations.
Cabin. Gonna be able to chew on it. Right? Kid Rob.
9:30 on 103.1 Fresh Radio.
Oh, 2.9.
To apply, visit careers.psu.edu.
Bob and Tom in the morning. Classic rock all day. Z1023.
Visit CrawfordCountyFairPA.com for details.
The Downtown Mall Bistro. You can always count on them to serve your... Have you look?
Welcome to Ohio. Ah, great. Ashtabula.
Staring at the sunset, babe. Red lips and rosy cheeks. Say you'll see me again, even if it's just pretend. Say you'll remember me. In a nice dress, staring at the sunset, babe. Red lips and rosy cheeks. Say you'll see me again, even if it's just pretend.
and get your work days going on 99.9 Classy 100. 80s, 90s now.
And I'd give up forever to touch you, 'cause I know that you feel me somehow. You're the closest to heaven that I'll ever be, and I don't wanna go home right now. All I could taste is this moment.
What can you get for about $4 a day? A new air conditioning system from Ziegler Heating and Cooling. With financing options, a new comfort system is just a few clicks away. Call Ziegler Heating and Cooling at 440-969-1141.
From the 3 News Weather Team, I'm meteorologist Peyton Domschke. As we head through the evening today, rain chances are going to stay pretty consistent, scattered, widespread kind of ordeal as a cold front sweeps its way on through. This is going to usher in some changes as we head into the days to come. I'm talking lower temperatures and lower humidity. We've got to wait about 24 to 48 hours for everything to settle on in, though.
98.3 more country guaranteed. Saturday so never lied to admit.
Like you're always stuck in second gear, and when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your year, I'll be there for you. When the rain starts to fall, I'll be there for you. Like I've been there before, I'll be there for you. 'Cause you're there for me.
It's 72 degrees, 0 chance of rain. It's been a perfect day. We're all spinning on our heels, so far away from real in California. We watched the sunset from our car. We all took it in. And by the time that it was dark, you and me had something, yeah. And this is what we've got. What we've got is gold. We're shining bright, and I want you to know.
Do not see a sign at all that says, you know, 20 inches red. What the fuck?
Stay the night. Yeah, stay the night. Yeah. We've been singing.
Don't want to miss it. It's available on demand.
Before you buy a mat, introducing the air traveler. Make
When we look at some of the big hacks that are known, do they have, factors in common?
So if we look at the sort of big money laundering breaches around cryptocurrency, often there's a common thread of a cryptocurrency exchange that has failed to protect the credentials of its users effectively. So people are able to steal not just 1 or 2 passwords, but all of the passwords from a database. Or somebody has implemented the cryptocurrency wallets insecurely.
in a way that it's possible for somebody to kind of get in there and transfer funds out of those wallets without even needing the passwords and credentials that users would traditionally use. So I would say those are definitely two weak points, are the wallets and the exchanges. Why do you think we've seen cyber criminals seeming to target wallets and exchanges?
I think sort of two related reasons. One is that there's a lot of money in this ecosystem, and the other is that there's this almost total lack of regulation around most of these intermediaries. So you've got wallet providers, you've got cryptocurrency exchanges, you've got all of these folks who are sort of effectively playing the role of a bank, or at least part of what we traditionally rely on banks for, but without all of the oversight and regulation.
Could more government oversight and regulation of the industry address some of these problems?
I think it could. The challenge here is, even if the United States could sort of get its act together and figure out how it wants to regulate cryptocurrencies, whether it wants restrictions, they would still have this big problem that, say, most of the big ransomware rings are based out of Russia and Eastern Europe. And that's not a problem that any individual country can really solve by itself, where there are so many different exchanges.
That was Josephine Wolf, Associate Professor of Cybersecurity Policy at Tufts University. I'm Megan McCarty-Carino, and that's Marketplace Tech. This is APM.
If you loved Ken Burns' country music on PBS, this is a WQLN road trip you won't want to miss. On October 8th, we will spend the first night in Louisville, Kentucky, and we'll tour the Kentucky Derby Museum. October 9th through the 12th, we will stay at the gorgeous Cambria Nashville Hotel and enjoy tours of Studio B, the Ryman, and a tour of the Grand Ole Opry, including tickets to a show. Don't miss out on this road trip. Seats are sure to sell quickly. Contact Tanae for more information or to sign up. 814-217-6013.
He has multiple Grammys, and his manager is Quincy Jones. But musical prodigy Jacob Collier's favorite thing is just playing around with his instruments at home.
I feel like curiosity is where so much of the joy starts.
A visit to Jacob Collier's home studio and the power of play. That's part 2 of our series, Work, Play, Rest. Next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR.
Sunday morning at 10 on WQLN NPR.
From the New York Times, I'm Sabrina Tavernisi. This is The Daily. On Friday, in a landmark ruling, a jury in Texas ordered Alex Jones, America's most prominent conspiracy theorist, to pay millions of dollars to a set of parents for the damages caused by his lies about the Sandy Hook mass shooting. I spoke with my colleague, Elizabeth Williamson, as the jury was deliberating that punishment. It's Monday, August 8th. So, Elizabeth, where are we catching you today? Where are you speaking from?
So I am in the Travis County Courthouse in Austin for the trial of Alex Jones, who is on trial here for defaming Scarlett Lewis and Neil Heslin, whose son Jesse, a 6-year-old, was killed at Sandy Hook.
And Elizabeth, remind us of Alex Jones's backstory and how this trial came about.
Alex Jones got his start in the 90s here in Austin, where he was a sort of oddball on community access TV and later on a radio show, but he started broadcasting more and more dark theories around the Oklahoma City bombing in the mid-90s, saying that that was planned by the government, the same for 9/11, but he took a particularly dark turn in 2012 when he said that the Sandy Hook shooting was a conspiracy, a plot by the government as a pretext to confiscate Americans' firearms, and he named individual family members as so-called crisis actors who were complicit in the plot.
Right, and that has had real consequences for those parents, as you've told us in the past on the show.
Absolutely. Alex Jones has an enormous audience, and that audience increased exponentially after he began talking about Sandy Hook. And in that audience of tens of millions of people, there were inevitably some people who truly believed what he was saying and targeted the families as liars and as frauds and people participating in an imagined mass shooting for profit. They accused them of faking their children's deaths or that the children never existed, and they began to approach them first online by making accusations against them and tormenting them, and then they began to confront them on the street and in public. So after years of this kind of torment, finally in mid-2018, the families of 10 Sandy Hook victims lodged a civil defamation suit against Alex Jones for the lies he had been spreading for those years.
And what happens next?
There were four separate lawsuits filed by the families in Texas and in Connecticut. Over the course of the preparation for the defamation trials, Jones repeatedly stonewalled. He withheld testimony. He failed to submit financial records and business records that were ordered by the court. Jones stonewalls on the discovery process in all of those cases for nearly 4 years. At the end of last year, judges in both states in all 4 cases ruled him liable by default, meaning he lost. It was a sweeping victory for the families. That set the stage for 3 trials for damages, of which this is the first. And in all of those trials, the jury's sole responsibility is to decide how much Alex Jones must pay these families for defaming them.
So Elizabeth, tell me about the parents. Who are these 2 parents making the claim?
Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis live near Newtown, Connecticut still. They had a son named Jesse, who was 6. When he died, he was in 1st grade at Sandy Hook. And Jesse played a really specific and special role when the gunman came to Sandy Hook. When he paused for some reason, whether it was to reload or because his magazine jammed, Jesse shouted, "Run." 9 of his classmates did run, and they survived. Jesse was killed moments later.
And what was the specific claim of defamation against Jones from Jesse's parents?
So years later, in 2017, Megyn Kelly was profiling Alex Jones on a show that she had on NBC.
For years, Jones has been spreading conspiracy theories, claiming, for instance, that elements of the U.S. government allowed the 9/11 attacks to happen, and that the horrific Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax.
And Neil appeared on the show to provide the family's viewpoint of the lies that Jones had been spreading all of these years.
I dropped him off at 9:04. That's when we dropped him off at school with his book bag. Hours later, I was picking him up in a body bag.
He had gone into the school in the wee hours of the morning on the night of the shooting, and he held Jesse's body.
I lost my son. I buried my son. I held my son with a bullet hole through his head.
And how did a defamation suit come out of that? What did Jones say?
Alex Jones was unhappy with the way he was being portrayed in Megyn Kelly's broadcast that night. And after the broadcast aired, one of his sidekicks, a guy named Owen Schroyer, went on InfoWars and said that Neil couldn't have held his son that night because, according to official reports, which of course conspiracy theorists had picked through and parsed and cherry-picked, the families, quote-unquote, weren't allowed to see their children after their deaths. Jones later picked up on Owen Schroyer's false claims and amplified them, and that was the genesis of the defamation lawsuit that Neil and Jesse's mom, Scarlett, filed against Alex Jones.
So this current trial is to determine how much Alex Jones has to pay the parents of Jesse Lewis. So bring me into the courtroom. What's happening?
So the first couple of days, Sabrina, were more what you could expect, establishing what happened on December 14th, 2012, the day of the shooting, and then Neil and Scarlett took the stand and testified.
My name is Neil Heslin. I'm the father of Jesse McCord Lewis, killed at Sandy Hook Elementary, December 14th, 2012. I feel very good about being here today. To face Alex Jones, to hold him accountable for what he said and did to me, to restore the honor and legacy of my son. that was tarnished by Mr. Jones.
And he's a kind of quiet and soft-spoken man. He described, really poignant small vignettes from Jesse's first 6 years. They palled around together. They collected recyclables and they would turn it in for pocket money for Jesse.
What was the best? Money.
So it was pretty powerful testimony.
This trial is the only way I can restore my credibility and reputation.
Is that air thick?
Neil had always said that he was really looking forward to confront Jones in the courtroom. But when he got there and took the stand, finally, Jones wasn't there. But he was watching Neil's testimony from his studio across town. And he was using the live feed from the courtroom to appraise Neil's performance. Neil seemed slow, as in unintelligent, that he was on the spectrum, maybe, and that he had been manipulated by the lawyers and by Jones's political enemies.
And can he just do that, like not show up to the trial?
Yeah, he was allowed to do that, and the family should have been as well, but instead they came and they kept waiting for Jones to show up, and only sporadically did.
And what about Christmas now? So she testified at Christmas, 90 following days, and everyone looking over
So she spoke about what she remembered best about Jesse. He was a big kid in the strong kid, and that kind of brought her to the same memory of what he did in the classroom that day.
He actually stood up to the shooter, and he saved 9 of his classmates' lives. For that act of bravery, he was actually
Wait this one out.
Commander-in-Chief funeral.
You're gonna be smarter about things this time around.
So shortly after that, the judge called a break for lunch. And it seemed clear that Scully
hold the conspiracy theorists to account.
I think that this accomplishes the broad goal that the families have expressed from the start, and that's to make a comment and send up a warning that this isn't just Alex Jones, although he's a big part of it. Alex Jones has had his fingerprints all over the most pernicious and damaging conspiracy theories that have circulated in our national discourse over the past decade since Sandy Hook. It was Pizzagate. It was the Great Replacement theory expressed in Charlottesville. It was coronavirus myths. And it was the Stop the Steal conspiracy theory in 2020. This is the point that the Sandy Hook families want to make with these lawsuits, that if these lies have come from leading parents like us, be careful in your own community. What is the destructive power of these lies? Whether it's our elections, our public health, our democracy itself. If this can happen to them, if these conspiracy theorists can come for them, they can come for all of us.
Elizabeth, thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Elizabeth Williamson is a features writer for the New York Times.
Oh, yeah. All right over.
On Friday, after I talked to Elizabeth, the jury in Texas awarded an additional $45 million in punitive damages to Scarlett Lewis and Neil Heslin. But the Times reports that the verdict against Jones may ultimately be mostly symbolic. The state of Texas puts a strict cap on punitive damages, so Jones may only have to pay a fraction of the dollar amount that the court awarded. However, those caps do not apply outside Texas, and next month, Jones will be tried in Connecticut.
The Daily is supported by Digital Research.
Market research to support business decisions and brand enhancement. Digital Research is committed to accuracy, insight, and actionable data. More at digitalresearch.com. And by Fidelity Wealth Management, helping create plans for a client's full financial picture. Fidelity.com/wealth. Investment minimums apply. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. You're listening to The Daily from the New York Times, distributed by American Public Media.
The Daily is powered by the journalism of the New York Times and is distributed by APM, American Public Media. You can go deeper into the stories you hear on The Daily at nytimes.com/The Daily. That's it for The Daily. I'm Michael Lombardo. See you tomorrow.
Funding comes from our members and this underwriter. Erie Insurance, providing auto, home, life, and business insurance. Information is available from local Erie agents or online at erieinsurance.com.
Tune in for Time Machine from The Currents. I'm your host, Bill DeVille, and together we're taking a sonic journey to a specific year in music history with a carefully curated list of some of the year's best songs as we look at what happened in music, pop culture, and the world.
Saturday afternoon at 2.
This radio station is listener supported. Listeners provide financial support that keeps us here for you. We're 91.3 FM, WQLN, Erie. If you'd like to help ensure that WQLN Radio will be here when you tune in, you can lend your financial support through our website, WQLN.org.
The following program was pre-recorded.
From the deck of the Starship Enterprise to the storied parquet of the NBA, Nichelle Nichols and Bill Russell changed how the world saw Black Americans. Nichols was the path-breaking actress on Star Trek at a time where very few Black women were key characters on TV.
Her position of a woman in power on TV, regardless of being Black or white, she was the only one. So it was super profound. And for Black women especially, it gave us hope. Makes you feel like you can do it too.
Russell was the basketball giant who stood up to racism in sports and society.
While I love everything that he did as a player and what he meant to the NBA overall in terms of the evolution of the game, what he did outside of that, I think, has had a tremendous impact, not just on sports, but our society overall.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. Today on Point, remembering Nichelle Nichols and Bill Russell. Stay with us. Live from NPR News, I'm Janine Herbst. President Biden visited eastern Kentucky today to survey the damage from a historic storm that hit the state nearly 2 weeks ago. This was his first official outing since testing negative for COVID-19. Standing Gold from member station WEKU has more.
President Biden and the First Lady made their way to eastern Kentucky to speak to families and see the devastation firsthand. After meeting with survivors and local officials, the president said the plan is not only to rebuild, but to improve the region.
We got clobbered going in, but we came out stronger. That's the objective here. It's not just to get back to where we were, it's to get back to better than where we were. And we have the wherewithal to do it now. The legislation has been bipartisanly passed.
Biden was referring to his bipartisan infrastructure law. He also announced that direct federal assistance will cover 100% of the total cost for a 30-day period of the Commonwealth's choosing in the coming months. For NPR News, I'm Stan Ingold in Richmond, Kentucky.
The two white men convicted of killing 25-year-old black man Ahmaud Arbery as he ran through their Georgia neighborhood, along with another white man who recorded the attack on his cell phone, are all sentenced today for federal hate crimes. That's in addition to the state life sentences. 36-year-old Travis McMichael and his father, 66-year-old Greg McMichael, were sentenced to life in prison, and William Roddy Bryan was sentenced to a 35-year prison term for recording the attack. Arbery's mother, Wanda Cooper Jones, says she's pleased with the outcome.
At this point, it is what it is. They did what they did, and now they have to pay for whatever they've done.
The judge refused the McMichaels' request, though, to serve their time in federal prison instead of a Georgia state prison. Russia says it's suspending U.S. on-site inspections of its nuclear site under a key strategic arms reduction treaty. NPR's Charles Maines has more.
The decision concerns the New START treaty, the sole remaining nuclear arms reduction pact between the former Cold War rivals. Russia's foreign ministry announced Moscow is suspending U.S. inspections temporarily, saying Western sanctions on Russian air travel and U.S. COVID restrictions are effectively making checks on American compliance untenable. The ministry, however, said Russia remains committed to the 2011 treaty.
In 1 mile, the destination is on your right.
Delivery system each country can deploy. Despite a fallout in U.S.-Russian relations over the conflict in Ukraine, President Biden last week called on Moscow to engage in negotiations to extend New START when the agreement currently expires in 2026. Charles Mates, NPR News, Moscow.
The Pentagon says another $1 billion in new military aid is headed to Ukraine. It's the biggest delivery yet of rockets, ammunition, and other arms. This comes as analysts warn that Russia is moving troops and equipment toward the southern port cities. The U.S. has now given upwards of $10 billion in military assistance to Ukraine. This is NPR. Historian David McCullough has died. The two-time Pulitzer Prize winner was a writer, editor, teacher, speaker, TV host, and narrator. His publisher, Simon & Schuster, says he died Sunday in Massachusetts at the age of 89. And here's Elizabeth Blair has this appreciation.
Critics praised David McCullough for his in-depth research, clarity, and lack of cynicism. Here's McCullough talking to WHYY's Fresh Air in 2001 about his biography of President John Adams.
He didn't believe we're all born equal, because he said all you have to do is look around and you can see that some people are born with more advantages than others.
McCullough was born in Pittsburgh. His father worked for the electricity company that bears the family name. In 2006, David McCullough received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. His wife, Rosalie, who he married in 1954, died 2 months ago. Elizabeth Blair, NPR News.
France is in the midst of its fourth heat wave this year as the country faces what the government warns is its worst drought on record. France's National Weather Agency says the heat wave started in the south and is expected to spread across the country and last until the weekend. The southern half of the country expects daytime temperatures of up to 104 degrees. Meanwhile, firefighters are back